We talk together about, that was funnier in my head. In 1843, Edgar Allan Poe published the story The Telltale Heart. Did any of you have to read that in high school? I had to read that in high school. It's a first-person story told from the perspective of a murderer talking about his murder most foul, of an old man whose primary crime appears to be a physical deformity because he had the eye of a vulture. Right? But that's not really what the story's about. The story's really about the beating of the dead man's heart. After he kills him, he buries him under the floor. You were looking forward to hearing this, weren't you? He buries him underneath the floorboards. And as people come and investigators come looking for the old man, the murderer says that he can hear that beating heart underneath the floorboards. The guy that he's killed is somehow still, and that the heart is beating, and as he hears it. Now, the Poe is a literary master, and he leaves you wondering, is he actually hearing the dead man? Or is he hearing his own heart, his own guilty heart, beating in his ears, the rush of his own blood through his ears, and the pounding of his own anxious heart because of the presence of the investigators who are there to get him? You don't ever really know. What you do know is at the end of the story, he pulls up the floorboards, and he exposes murder to people who didn't know he'd done it. Why do I begin with that creepy story? Well, because today we're going to be talking just a little bit about the heart of a murderer. It's you, me. What kind of heart beats in the chest of a murderer? What kind of heart is that? And perhaps just as significantly, what kind of heart do I have? What is there beating in my chest? To answer that question, we're going to go to the mountainside that we've been going to for the past couple of weeks, and to which we will return again and again over this year. Going with Jesus to listen to Jesus teach us. We who are Christians are people of the Christ, are we not? People who Christ has saved, right? But we also, when we enter the waters to be immersed into Christ Jesus, at least what we used to say, what we often say now is that I believe that Jesus is the Son of God, which is a theological truth. But the good confession used to be, and more biblically is, Jesus is Lord. That's the good confession. I accept Jesus as my King. He is in charge in my life. It's significant to believe that He is the Son of God, but the ancient church seemed to think it was more significant to claim His lordship. And what that means is what He says goes. So we come to Him again and again to listen to the Lord and let Him tell us how we need to organize our lives. His teachings become the central purposes of our life. I want to live obeying Him. It is a hard way of life. It is the only way of life. All other ways are ways of death. So we come again to hear Him talk to us about our hearts. Last week when we got together, we spent a little bit of time listening to Him tell us about the law. In fact, what we're going to do for the rest of February is listen to Him tell us about the law of Moses, because He said, I didn't come to abolish the law, I came to fulfill. You know, it's an interesting thing. So many Christians treat those two words like they're synonyms. Abolishment and fulfillment both end up in them going away. What He is saying to us is, I didn't come to get rid of it. I came to fulfill its purposes so that what the law was given to do will actually be accomplished in you. Because the law was given to us so that we might become a certain kind of people. So that we might know the heart of God, and in knowing the heart of God, might attune our hearts to beat together with His. So that we might take on God's nature as our own. And this takes the supernatural power of God at work within us. But as long as we read the law, and indeed our Bibles, the way that the Pharisees did, looking for the rules, that will not happen. As long as we say, what are the things that I got to do to get God off my back so that He won't curse me, so that He won't damn me, so that I won't have to go to hell, so that I won't have to suffer in this life? What are the things that I have to do to make this grumpy God be satisfied, and then I can go on with my life? As long as we approach things that way, we're not going to get there. Jesus' read of the law is radically different. In fact, what Jesus is going to do with us in the Sermon on the Mount is going to just show us a sampling of passages of the law. I suspect because He doesn't have 6 days to keep these folks' attention. And so what He's going to do with them in Matthew chapter 5 is to show them a hermeneutic, a way of reading the law. And this can be applied to the entire law and to the entire prophets. The whole Old Testament can be read Jesus' way. In order to accomplish that, He's going to take a smattering of laws and show us His way of reading it. So He'll begin with 2 of the 10 Commandments. Why? Because this is the heart of Judaism. And if Jews wanted to approach the law, they wanted to know about the 10 Commandments. What do you have to say about that? Then He'll show 2 random laws, 2 just run-of-the-mill laws, and show that this approach works there too. And then He will head to what had come to be recognized as kind of the ethical heart of Judaism. Love your neighbor as yourself. And His whole direction is headed that way. But it's also all to show you, look, here's a couple of laws, here's a couple of these laws, here's a couple of these. Read the law like this. If you want life from the law, quit using it to get God off your back and to try to save yourself, and instead read the law to ask, what kind of heart would do this? What kind of heart would not do this? Because that is God's heart. The law has shown us our God. Jesus also has shown us our God as a person who lived by the law perfectly. So if you want to see what God looks like, you can look at the law of Moses. More perfectly, you can look at Christ, and you can see the nature of your God, and then you can say, this also I should be. And what He's doing here is He's showing you this is how you need to read the law. It is a very, very different read from the Pharisees. The Pharisees will take a law and say, okay, there is a line here, right? A line drawn in the sand. And as long as I stay on this side of the line, I have not broken the law. I have been obedient to the law, right? So if the law is do not murder, there's a line here in the sand, and if I step over here, I have now produced a corpse. Okay? I have taken someone who was alive, and I have made them dead person. That broke the law. It's pretty obvious, right? You know when you've broken the law. The thing about the line is, though, I just don't have to get across that. But I can get close to it. Ooh, but I'm still over here. And as long as I stay over here, I can do anything I want to over here, and I'm still obedient. Just don't cross the line. Feel free to dance around on that side of the line all you want to. Because God said don't murder. He didn't say don't kill your reputation. God said don't murder. He didn't say don't hate you. And man, I have freedom to hate you because there's no law against it. So I can do whatever I want to, and I can have all the murder in my heart that I want, as long as I don't cross the line. And so the Pharisee is going to say, all that junk, all that mess, that can be down there. All that scribbly yuck. Fine. Have contempt. Have greed. Have hate. But don't cross the line. Stay on that side of the line. And the line is don't murder, and God cares that you don't cross the line. It's a boundary marker so that you can know you are His. And if you cross the line, you failed. This is their read of the Scripture. It produces people who pay great attention to righteousness and great attention to goodness and great attention to obedience and not very much attention to the kind of person that they are. Do you see the danger of the Pharisee? Christ will say that the purpose of the law is to reform the stuff underneath the line. When He said don't murder, He didn't just mean don't produce a corpse. He means don't be a murderer. And people who commit murder start murdering long before there is a dead person. Sometimes they produce a dead person and sometimes they don't. But they carry murder in their hearts long before they carry it out in the world. And Jesus is saying the law was written so that you would know the kind of heart you have. When He says, I've come to fulfill the law, you don't fulfill rules. Rules are either there or they're not. What you fulfill are promises. You carry out promises. You fill up promises. And when God said, don't kill, what God was saying is, if you're with me, if you're in covenant with me, if you're close to me, you won't be a killer. But see, they loved the law of God so much that they paid very little attention to the God of the law. And they lost sight of His heart. And so many of us are guilty of exactly the same error. Have you ever been technically obedient? You kept all the rules. You went through all the right rituals. You did all the attendance of the right meetings. But when you were in your place of business or in your family, murder was in you. Have you been there? What Jesus is saying is reform the heart. He wants to see a change that happens on the inside, not just the outside. Clean the inside of the cup and the whole thing will be clean. That's what He's headed towards. So as He unpacks these laws, you're going to see Him always dealing with the nature of the heart, leading the human person to become more like God. That's what He does throughout chapter 5. Okay? So let's have a look at it. He says, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, you shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. Now, incidentally, Jesus is not arguing with Moses in these passages, because the next thing he's going to say, hang on. The next thing he's going to say is, but I say to you. He's not arguing with Moses, okay? Moses got it right, okay? Because Moses heard it from whom? Yeah, did God get it wrong? No, what Moses wrote was correct. He's not arguing with Moses. He's arguing with the Pharisee interpreters of Moses. Okay? Make sense? Incidentally, of this, only this stuff in red here, you shall not murder, that's the only thing he's quoting from Moses. Okay? That's why he says, you've heard that it was said to people long ago. Long time people have been saying this. What have they been saying? Don't murder. And then we get this nice addition to the law. Anyone who murders is subject to judgment. Granted, there are other places in the law that deals with what do you do with a murderer. Yes. And the interpreters of Moses are applying that. But note that that's something Moses said and the rest of it's not. Okay? Anyone who murders will be subject to judgment. That says volumes about their read of the book of Deuteronomy or of Exodus. Because when they read it, they hear, don't murder. And if you do, I'm going to get you. Whereas Jesus, he appears to hear, don't murder. You won't be with me. Is a very different read. Okay? So that's the Pharisee. So what does Jesus do that's different? Well, he says, I say to you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Anyone who says to his brother, Racha, will be answerable to the Sanhedrin. And anyone who says to his brother, you fool, will be answerable to the very fires of hell. So he takes the law about murder and he says, by the way, this is really about anger. What he's saying is, this is the junk that's down underneath the line. And this law is meant to address the junk down underneath the line. So anger is murder. Does that make sense? Well, think about anger for a minute. If you do a Google image search for anger, that's what you get. Yeah. That's not real attractive. Do any of those faces typify what you think of as God? When you think about God in your mind, do you think about something like this? But doesn't this typify anger? Do you see how far we are from the heart of God in almost all of our anger? And our anger, we will always be able to justify it. We will always be able to point to it and say, this is why I am angry. I am angry because of this. Why do we get angry? We get angry because we feel violated. We feel like I want to go this way, and my wants have been thwarted, and I've been frustrated. The person cut me off in traffic, or my wife won't do what I want her to do. And that's why we get angry, because don't you realize that I'm the most important person in this drama? I am the main character. You are all you are all supporting actors. Welcome to the show. Play your part. Do it right. That's why we get so angry. We get offended and feel violated. And now, folks, there is a place for holy anger. There is something of that because God describes Himself as angry. But why? Because He feels so violated? No, He sees injustice. There is a reason we feel this thing, but most of the time we label ourselves as victim and we get so mad so easy. Have you been there? Has anyone ever looked back on their time when they were really, really angry and said, man, I'm glad I did that. That was the best thing I ever did. I improved my life so significantly by doing this. Have you ever looked back and said, what was I thinking? I just wish I could take those words back. But you can't. The reality is, these are anger on Google images. They're so big, they're so huge. Most of the time our anger looks more like this, doesn't it? You know, most of our anger is brooding. Very often the other person doesn't even know we're angry unless they know how to read all the cues, right? Well, we feel this burning. Some of us stay here most of the time, ready to lash out, ready to defend ourselves, ready to justify the self, ready to show why it's their fault, why they're such a jerk, and I wouldn't have done that if it weren't for you violating me like this. You see how alien this all is to the heart of God. That's why anger is murder. Anger is murder because it is far from the nature of your God. When you act out of anger, you act out of Adam's broken nature, not Christ. And you break yourself. Do any of us here aspire to murder? You go, man, I really hope that I get to kill somebody this week. Does anyone want that? You know, I will suggest to you that most of us don't aspire to our anger either. We just think we don't have any choice. Because they did that. But what the law says is, at the heart of who we are, our nature, we are designed to be like a God who is not selfish. And most of our anger is selfish. By the way, laws also produce societies. We tend to think of a law as governing myself as an individual. The law of Moses is meant to tell me how to live my life by myself as an individual. I want you to notice something that Jesus is doing here as He interprets the law. Because He's saying this, in my society that I will build, it will be like this. Our use of the law will be this way. So He says that if you're angry with your brother, you'll be subject to judgment. And if you say Raka, you'll be answered to the Sanhedrin. And if you say you fool, you'll be answered to the very fires of hell. Okay, now I want you to notice that these two things, those are human behaviors. He's saying what we need is a society that gathers together a group of people among whom anger is such a foreign reality that when a person loses their temper and becomes angry, we would pull together a tribunal. We would have a police force to go and say, come with us. Now sit down. You behaved like this. Why did you do that? And we have to deal with that together. This is such a violation of our society's founding principles that it would require what we only do for murder. Because that's the same word He says that they say about murder. He's saying, no, anger in my culture that I will build will be so foreign among you that you would get a court together to deal with it. And anyone who says, racha, that's a word of contempt, kind of a clearing of the throat. He's saying that our society, when we gather together, that will be so foreign among us that we would have contempt toward one another. Because that's not just anger. That's anger given some expression. Contempt is anger with legs. Right? And He's saying if that happened among us, that would be a Supreme Court case. Because we will live together in such peace that this junk doesn't happen among us. And someone who says, you fool, now to us, that's just a contempt term. But to ancient Judaism, you fool, look at the Proverbs. The fool is someone whom God despises. So if you say, you fool to somebody, you're saying, I hate you and so does God. You're basically saying, go to hell. That's what you're saying to that person. And he's saying, you yourself are in danger of hell. That we would have a society that believed so much in real peace, in working out conflict so that there could be real peace among us. And we would live based on love, that these things would be alien and foreign, and the society would say, we can deal with this if it starts going on. That's how Jesus is reading the law. He's saying the law about murder is really about being people of love and people of peace who work out trouble without hate and anger. Now, how do I do that? Well, he gives me a couple of case studies. He's going to say, if, therefore, you're at the altar, you're in worship, and there you remember that somebody has something against you, go. Leave the altar. Leave the gift. Go and first be reconciled with your brother and then come back and do your worship. Now, to you and me, that might be instruction that, frankly, I've seen this done in churches where before they take the supper, they have a time where they share the peace. Where if I'm angry with somebody before I do this, I'm going to get up and walk over to that person. We'll sing for 10 minutes, and I got a chance to go over and talk to you and work it out before together we take the supper. So that we don't take the supper hurting each other. I always thought that was kind of good. And they don't have to do that. It's better to do that before you even come here. Right? But it's kind of cool. I've always thought that's kind of a cool practice. But that's kind of neat. You got to get your head around the Jewish mind, though. Because once the sacrifice is started, you have entered into sacred time. And there is absolutely nothing more significant in your life than God. So whatever it is out there, you got to be with God. That's the Pharisee mind. Well, what he's saying is, no, from God's perspective, you at the altar with hate in your heart, with anger in your heart, you're not at the altar yet. Leave it and go work it out. Because your God loves that person, and God is a God of peace, and before you come worship me, you deal with your anger. You put your anger away, because then you will have a heart prepared to be with me. He's going to say it's right there in the worship thing. You don't come here and pretend you're not a person to hate when you are. You go work it out. And even sacred time is not as significant as you yourself being a holy person. That's how Jesus reads the law. And he'll say, settle matters quickly with your adversary who's taking you to court while you're yet on the way with him. Because otherwise, he may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and the officer may cast you into prison. And I tell you the truth, you won't get out until you've paid the last penny. What's going on here? Well, folks, we are always on the way. Always. I want you to notice that in both of these circumstances, both of his test cases, the onus is on you. You know that someone has something against you when you're at the altar. That doesn't mean you're angry at them. It means they're angry at you. So you don't abandon your brother to be in a place of sin and think you can worship God and be okay. Or here, the problem is yours. You've hurt your brother and they're taking you to court and you're in the wrong. The onus is on you. The obedience to the law is expected of you. Why? So that you can be a person like God, a person of peace, who works out relationships. So often we will let things just sit there and fester, and festering is an infection. And we become less and less and less like God. And we push it down to the place where we don't work on it because we can't reach it because we can't remember it anymore. But it sits there disturbing us and troubling us. And he's saying, don't do that. If there's trouble in your relationship, go. Go and be with the other and love the other. And if the other is mad at you, go. And inasmuch as it is up to you, work to establish the peace. And if you know you've hurt somebody, go. Because frankly, if you stay in that place, then you will end up in a prison. I mean, you might be free to walk around and go to the grocery store, but your heart's trapped. And you won't get out until you have worked this thing out. Until you have made recompense, until you have solved the relational problem. You must pay the very last penny before you get out. Why go there? Why go through that? Be a person of peace continuously. Don't have a line that you say, well, I haven't crossed the line. They did, but I didn't. And I'm not going to work it out. Don't be there. Look into yourself and say, how am I unlike God? And what can I work on? And how can I be with God in this place? So I end where we began, asking ourselves, what kind of heart beats in the heart of a murderer? It's a heart of anger, a heart of contempt, a heart of hate. And I ask, what kind of heart do I have? If I look over my life and I look over my relationships, am I keeping the law as Jesus would have me keep it? Am I living with the Christ and letting Him work on me to change who I am? Am I coming into contact with a different kind of heart so that my heart can beat with His? Well, if not, it's time to tear up the boards. It's time to get that heart out into the open where it can be healed. And if you need the prayers of the church this morning, let us do it. If you need the healing that can only come from God, because this is not, incidentally, a self-help place. This is not something you do on your own. You need God's help and you need Christian siblings. And if your heart is an alien heart to heaven, don't stay there. Let us pray for you. Let us care for you. And if you need the healing that only God can give, then ask for it. And it may mean you need to ask for it here, and it may mean that you need to go to one other person. Maybe it's someone you've been hating for years, and ask for it there. Wherever it is, seek the healing of God, because He can change us at the level of our hearts. We can't change our own hearts, but He can. And we can become different people in the hands of our God. If you came to this place today and you're suffering, we want to love you. Don't leave here with your suffering secret without letting us know so we can care for you. Because this place, I believe, beats with the heart of God. And we do want to care for you in your trouble. And if you came to this place and you haven't made covenant with the Christ, He's done what's necessary for you. He wants you for Himself. The water is right here. You can make that confession that Jesus is Lord and take Him on in baptism. You can do it today. We'll wait for lunch. I know I've rambled for a while, but we'll wait, right? You can do it today. If this morning you're subject to the invitation of God, right now would be a good time to come while we stand and sing.